story of Armenian wine. And on the seventh month, the ark landed on top of Mount Ararat, and Noah began to grow plants and planted a vineyard. Then he made wine. It came out so good that he could not stand the temptation. He drank of it and got intoxicated. This is the first ever testimony on Armenian grapes and wine, as old as the world we know and as reliable as the Old Testament. Quite naturally, scholars came to prove millennia later that cultivated grapes have originated on the Armenian highlands. The land, which later became known as the cradle of civilization, on which the Armenian nation-states originated shortly thereafter. Artifacts from archaeological excavations support the fact that Armenia is origin of the grape species. This is also proven by the more than 600 grape varieties that exist on the territory of today's Armenia, shrunk many times since those days. And finally, there is ample linguistic evidence. The words Gini, Maran, Garas, and a dozen more others have been borrowed from Armenian by our neighbors close and far. The culture elevated to an art of creating wine was also transferred along. Little is known about the first Armenian nation-state, Hayassa. Instead, the grapes and wines of the second one, Nairi, are the subject of not only archaeological finds, but many an Assyrian inscription. For example, the war booty inventory of the 6 Assyrian raids on Armenia in the 9th century BC includes wine. It is not accidental that a specialist would later confirm the grapes that were subsequently grown in Assyria were of Armenian origin, and the Assyrian, Egyptian, and Armenian technologies of winemaking were identical. The land of Nairi, having gained power since the 9th century BC, was called Urartu by its neighbors, which meant the land of Ararat. Dozens of cuneiform inscriptions which survived those days attest. In order to validate the might of their reign and to gain everlasting life, Armenian kings had to build shrines and plant vineyards. As a token of love and immortality, the vineyards were called after their daughters and wives. Every spring, bulls were sacrificed to grapes in the temple of the principal god. Moreover, the sacrifice took place 3 more times a year, when grapes blossomed, when the vines bent on the heavy bunches, and finally during the harvest. As opposed to Assyrian inscriptions of plunder, Armenian kings told of the irrigation canals and cellars they had built, of desert transformed into budding vineyards. Every vineyard they planted was accompanied with a proud statement, "Through the power of God Chaldee, I have accomplished this heroic feat." When Armenian troops set out to conquer new lands, they always included winemakers who were so important that they were noted in the lists alongside thousands of cavalrymen, spear throwers, and other personnel. The many requirements to be met by the new land included the ability to yield good wine. In the course of the 200 years that preceded the 7th century, the entire country was covered by vineyards, stretching first from the basin of Lake Van onto the Ararat Valley and the neighborhood of Lake Urmia. The scale of the cellars that were built back then is astounding. So are the irrigation canals. Still used today, the technological culture is amazing. chunks of sulfur found by the old wine vessels indicate that Armenians have been using sulfuric gas 3,000 years ago, without which current-day winemaking is still unthinkable. Charred grape pips found inside those vessels belong to the same local varieties grown today and can tell us a lot about the wine of those days. Tubes with sand of varying grain are proof of the use of fine filtration. On open-air platforms built by the sailors, wine was condensed in wintertime and exposed to scorching sun in the summer, indicating that Armenian wine got to neighboring countries without losses in its quality. It is not incidental that the enemies to establish their victory alongside ruined shrines also mentioned the vineyards they had set to fire. But even then, they were not able to hold back their amazement at the deeds of Armenian kings. One may sympathize with the sentiments of Assyrian Sargon II, which he experienced at the sight of endless canals and ducts that have turned wastelands into green fields, while the Armenian king showered grapes and fruits upon them. Great is his surprise at fragrant wines filling in numerous wineskins, large and small, which seemed endless even after his Myrian troops were inebriated. Of course, he had not come just to admire the wine of his adversary. He had come to raise and plunder, so that fear and devastation would reign here for centuries to come. He had come, as would his successor, to take along Armenian grapes, especially for that purpose taking Armenian winemakers among his listed prisoners. Strabo mentions that in the Hellenic period the country, which then stretched from one sea to another and was called Armenia by strangers, was completely covered by vineyards. Herodotus describes wine from the land of Armenians brought down Tigris and Euphrates on cowhide rafts to be sold in Assyria. Xenophon recounts fragrant wines and the outlandish barley drink he had tasted in Armenia around the same time, so strong that it had to be sipped through straws. The Greek traveler must have partaken of beer fortified with alcohol. Yes, alcohol, since its distillation technology as well as beer were known in Armenia for 400 years before Xenophon's arrival there. This is attested to by a cuneiform inscription of an Urartian king on grape spirit, in which he calls it the drink of kings. Viticulture and winemaking have remained the cornerstone of the country's economy throughout the Middle Ages. Among the nation's spiritual values, grapes and wine are forever identified with victory, love, and eternal life. This connection was so powerful that being the first in the world to adopt Christianity as an official religion, the Armenians devised the unique philosophy of Genesis with a focus on grapes and wine in the new system of values. Since the early medieval period, the cross is perceived as a sacred winepress upon which Christ is squashed like grapes. Armenian saints and martyrs were identified with grapes becoming wine in the press. Contrary to established religious canon, Eden was perceived as a vineyard, the tree of life as a vine, and the divine treat as a feast under the grapevine. In popular interpretation, life represented pastime in the vineyard. The king was the kindly gardener, and the grape-laden vine was the reward for his wise policy. In the vineyard, the fruit from the tree of life transformed into the vital liquid, acquiring the meaning of prosperous life. Therefore, the country's defense was identified with the protection on the vineyard. The enemy was the bear making foray, and the farmer became a soldier. In a life-and-death battle with the bear, the magnificent grape varieties of Armenia, along with the good old traditions of making legendary wines, were handed over from generation to generation. Many manuscript on wine was written and copied through the centuries. Legends and hymns were dedicated to it. As early as in the 10th century, our ancestors compiled an encyclopedia of viticulture and winemaking. This unique system of viticulture and winemaking used materials and skills, structures and equipment that were to be discovered in Europe only centuries later. Throughout the process of creating wine, solid science mixed with the spiritual to result in wonderful traditions and rules by which grapes had to be blessed in church prior to squeezing. And a man squashing grapes in the press with their bare feet had to be clean in the soul as well as in the body. Squashing itself was not just in the pumping the feet, it was a dance to the beat of drums, a godsend communicating the rebellious spirit of the nation to the grapes. By the end of the 19th century, dozens of wineries and cognac distilleries were built across Armenia. Armenian ports, Madeiras and sherries had earned themselves numerous Grand Prix in Europe. The triumphant campaign of Armenian Cognac was in the making. At the beginning of the 20th century, the growth rate of Armenia Cognac production exceeded that of all Russian provinces combined, and its output volume was the highest in the Caucasus. Thousands of hectares of new vineyards were planted. Radiant new dessert wines and liqueurs were created. The First World War devastated the country. The vineyards were once again set to fire. The industries were destroyed and the stock of wine and spirits were pillaged. This was followed by the advance of Soviet power. And once again, everything had to start from the baseline of almost nothing at all. Everything started anew, but with the loss of two important wine-producing regions, which were hacked away from Armenia. Throughout 70 years of Soviet domination, the territory of Armenian vineyards quadrupled. While having only 1% of the Soviet Union's vineyards, Armenia produced more than 12% of the country's elite cognacs. Thanks to its character, unique bouquet, and unmatched flavor, Armenian Cognac competed with the best of its kind through the world. Nairi and Akhtamar, Vaspuragan and Ani were blended as the fiery witnesses to the centuries of viticulture and winemaking in the country, as the embodiment of unyielding longing for the lost vineyards. In 1919s, the years immediately following independence, the collapse of the Soviet Union was accompanied by yet another loss of most of the vineyards. A new crisis was looming, but we once again got back on our feet thanks to our divine land and the everlasting spirit of the Armenian. We breathed new life into our wines in the Vyotsor province, where one of the oldest grape varieties in the world, Areni, grows at altitudes of up to 1,800 meters above sea level. When grapes in the valley already begin to burst from the sugar content, The harvest in the olden sky-soaring vineyards just begins to ripen. We re-established ourselves in the Tavush province, the cozy corner of northern Armenia resembling Europe with its soft and moist climate. Billowed terraces, misty vineyards embracing the woods, sultry sunny days intermittent with a fog. The Banants and Lalvar grape varieties from these fantastic vineyards give birth to the fine and soft wines of the north. And the Ararat Valley was once again reborn in the heart of the country. The ancient grapes in the hot sun at the foot of blessed Mount Ararat enter the press again to get a new incarnation in superb Armenian wine and cognac, telling the world, "Drink me, for I am the blood of your forefathers' earth. Cup me in your hands for a communion with a heavenly country called Armenia."